becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band that connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal places to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, turn our towns and destroy the lives of our people. In this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the work of death, desolation, and tyranny.
Secret bureaucracy, it's just a lie. The devil's henchmen in suit and tie.
Friends, family, countrymen, lend me your ears. This is Tim with another episode of America the Battlefield. Why is it a battlefield? Because in my humble opinion, America is the battlefield in the animating contest of freedom for the common man worldwide. And as goes America, so goes the world. Today I'm joined with my friend Robert Humelbaugh. We've been friends for a while. He's a licensed CCW instructor here in the state of Oregon and for Idaho. I took his class. It was amazing. It was long, but I learned a lot. And he's also a former Marine and former Army National Guardsman and EOD tech, and he's a disabled veteran. Without further ado, I'll let him introduce himself. Robert?
Thank you, Tim. Yes, happy to be with you.
He also has a company, Survival Sheath Systems. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, Robert?
Yeah, that was a inspiration back in about 1999 while I was an Army EOD tech. My first sergeant was a triathlete. She was a very intense woman. She would ride her Ducati with the EOD crab on the tank. First to work, last to leave, could out PT any of us, just fantastic woman. And she said to me, "Hey, Bob, let's run across Alaska for an adventure race." And I said, there's bears and stuff like that up their top. I mean, they'll kill us, And she said, "Well, I don't care. Bring a gun." And I became obsessed with trying to figure out a way to run comfortably with a handgun. And so I got out of the Army shortly after that in 2000 and purchased a sewing machine from Walmart and came up with the chest holster, which was kind of my flagship product in the holster realm. After that, now, of course, it's very popular. You have a lot of companies copying it, but I did start making that in 2001, and I've been making it ever since in various creations. I have also branched out into shoulder holsters, very popular here in the Oregon area, are my inside the waistband holsters, outside the waistband holsters. So between that, my grandchildren, my children, all of my various hobbies and teaching, which I do a lot of, it keeps me really busy.
As you know, I'm a happy customer of yours. I have a couple of your products that you custom made for me, including one of your awesome chest rigs. I'll put a picture up for the listeners.
Oh, that'd be great.
So today we're going to talk primarily about the Second Amendment and the lawful framework of the unorganized militias of the several states, which there is an exhaustive framework for. And I'd like to distinguish between the organized and the unorganized militias and what those mean. There's this erroneous argument that's going around today, like, oh, we no longer need the militia because we have the National Guard, even though the framework of law distinguishes between the two.
Right, exactly. And the framework of the armed citizen is something that goes back way prior to the founding of America, of course. But most of our laws and jurisprudence come from Old English law. Even you could almost argue pre-English law, because if you look up King Canute, who was, of course, a Viking conqueror of England at the time, after he took over, he actually issued decrees that every man, even though it was a monarchy, every man would provide his own mail shirt, his own weapon, in the case of a call-up to defend the area. And that moved through all of the different philosophers from that time period all the way up through John Locke, even back to the Greeks. But the founders were all very, very familiar with this, and they cited it constantly. And they understood, after dealing, of course, with England and the Redcoats, all of that stuff, as we all know with our common history, the founders knew that one of the most important things was to have no standing armies, which of course we've now violated that over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
and have the ability for the citizenry to throw off an oppressive government. And the militia was formed and codified, actually, in our founding documents and in our Second Amendment to keep the government from becoming too loud and too oppressive, because, as it says in our founding documents, if the government becomes too oppressive, it is our duty to throw them off of us and to stop them from oppressing us. And it's in the documents that all of our legislators swear to and swear an oath to. So it is the height of hypocrisy for them to propose legislation and enact legislation that directly interferes with, well, the Second Amendment. I mean, think about Saturday Night Live actually just kind of very hilariously did a funny skit about that with Walton Goggins, where they say, oh, we have the First Amendment. We just got this done. What should the Second Amendment be? And he's in the corner and he takes these sunglasses and he says, guns. And it's actually very funny, but it's also true, because if you're able to back up your speech and prevent people from being angry about it, you have to have the right to self-defense. And the right to self-defense is an inherent God-given right. It is one of the most important rights. In fact, I would argue the reason America has lasted so long is because of the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. Way more than the First Amendment. I mean, many things have happened with the First Amendment. Thank God that our founders
power of the
recognized
pen
that.
And the power of
power
the sword.
Of the pen, of the sword. You have the power of the pen to say, hey, I disagree with this. And when those in power come to silence you, they hesitate when they know that you can fight back. And if you look at history, in fact, if you look at all the other countries on the planet, we are the last one with the First Amendment. Our neighbors to the north are being arrested and imprisoned for their speech. England has thousands of people in prison because of Facebook posts. Any other country will come and snatch you up. Yes, and they'll give it various monikers. They'll give it various titles. But any other country, you can be imprisoned or arrested or disappeared for your speech. And there is no other country that allows you to keep the same parity of force that the military has to stop them from doing that. And we saw examples of this during COVID. We saw examples of this of saying, hey, we're going to send, people with guns. Well, who are those people, right? As I say in my classes, what government is at the end of the day is a territorial monopoly on the use of force. That's all it is. It is who gets to hurt people without as much scrutiny as any other person, right? And so I tell people in my class all the time, the government gets really, really angry when you defend yourself, because what you're doing is you're cutting in on a cartel, right? They have a cartel ownership over the use of violence,
a monopoly on violence.
Yes, that's what it is. It is a territorial monopoly, right? And we can even see it with our permits. When we travel from state to state, our concealed handgun permit is subject to different scrutiny depending on the state you get in and how you have to interact with who, mainly how you have to interact with the people that have the monopoly on the use of force. So, for example, the Utah concealed carry permit is a fantastic permit because it allows you to travel all over the place. I recently traveled to Louisiana and Mississippi, and I was able to travel around there armed. And in Louisiana, in New Orleans, there's a beautiful, the official World War II museum for the United States. And as I walked into the museum, the metal detectors went off. And the guy in the suit, said, hey, is there any reason you set off for metal detectors? And I said, yeah, I'm carrying 2 guns and multiple knives. And he said, do you have an excuse for that? And I pulled out my Utah permit and said, here you are, sir. And he looked at it and he said, well, that does that. You have a nice day, sir. I said, man, this is fantastic, but
that's how you talked me into also getting the Utah permit.
Yeah, the Utah permit is a must have. And Utah, it's interesting because as we discuss in the class, if you look at the actual laws concerning self-defense, and mainly when it comes down to, self-defense is a property right exercise. right? Because we all have personal agency, even though it's very, very popular right now in America to deny that anybody else has agency and groups have agency and that guy couldn't help it. No, we all have personal agency. Every human being has personal agency.
An ant has personal agency.
And oh yeah, although it is, they're kind of a massive collective, right?
Yeah.
They communicate with pheromones.
But even they retain their right of self-preservation.
They do.
The
They'll
smallest
stop
animal.
and they have built-in weapons, right? And just like a cat has built-in weapons, one of my favorite martial arts instructors, James Keating, he always says, look, everything in nature has claws and thorns. And they can, even plants can protect themselves, but we aren't equipped with those things. So of course we're tool using bipeds, we create these tools, but the right to self-defense, we're equipped with a brain. Yes. And we are singular. God created us as a singular organism that can do this. Only we can do this. And it's so important to preserve that. And the incredible majesty, I mean, I'm constantly in awe when I read the quotes of the founders, because at that time, the whole world was under monarchy of one type or another. There was rampant slavery, as we both know as Marines. I like to tell the story a lot about the Presley O'Bannon Mamluk sword, the Marine Corps officer sword. And I always say to people, why do the Marines carry that sword? And it was literally to relieve European and American slaves in Tripoli, which is why it says from the shores of Tripoli to the halls of Montezuma. They're referencing the Mexican adventures that the Marines did early on. And then, of course, we had to go to Tripoli because a full 1/3 of the U.S. national debt was being paid to ransom hostages that were being taken on the high seas. And we sent Marines to do that. And of course, Presley O'Bannon, with a few Marines and a lot of helpers, local mercenaries, took out the guy in Tripoli. They called it the Bey, his name was. Took him out. He had to have his sword relieved. That became the Marine Corps officer's sword, that ivory-handled sword. That was the liberation of people being held in hostage, the liberation of people being kept in slavery, right? And even now we have all of this talk of, you had a reparation for this, reparation for that. The millions and millions and millions of Europeans that were taken in slavery by the Ottomans, mainly, who didn't lose their grip on power until after World War I. The millions of people that were freed with slavery, how were they freed from slavery? It had to be guns. It had to be firearms, which our founders recognized this is an inherent right to have. You have to be able to have personal agency. You have to be able to have personal self-defense. No other country really, really recognizes that like America does. And the people in the legislature, in both the state and federal houses, insist upon eroding that right. And there's only one reason for that. There's only one reason for that. They want to do things to you that they can't do while you're armed. They want to either steal from you in the form of odious taxes, fines. They want to silence you, as they did during COVID, as we saw. They want to stop you from moving about. They want to stop you from exercising all those other amendments. So I listen to a lot of different commentators and podcasts and programs from all around the world, and the Canadians are seething that they did not enjoy the Second Amendment. They're seething that they didn't enjoy the First Amendment. And what I find sad is a lot of these foreign commentators, they are much more passionate about our Constitution than our own citizens are, and our Bill of Rights than our own citizens are. And we're now labeled as extreme if we discuss and defend our Bill of Rights, which is insane, because every person who joins the military, as we did, every person who takes office swears an oath. Well, have you read it?
Even if we quote the laws that are still on the books, we're considered still extremists.
On the books. Yeah, still in the Second Amendment gun nuts. No, we are liberty nuts. We like liberty. We like personal agency. And Western culture is built upon that. Unfortunately, you don't see this in Asia, right?
No.
You don't see personal liberty in Asia. That's not a cultural identity there. You don't see this in Africa. You don't even see it in Australia, sadly.
They have a
It's
generational curse of feudalism and communism that they're
yes,
trying to break free from.
yes, and people, and that's the beauty of that. People can come from that country, any of these countries, come here. They can experience the liberty that has given us. And there's all kinds of arguments, about, oh, well, look at all the stuff that's happening. That's true. Well, nothing's ever going to be fantastic. Nothing's
Mhm.
ever going to be a utopia. Of course, the word utopia means nowhere.
It only exists in theory on paper.
Yes,
It
but
can't exist in practical application.
there's no way it can, because you have human nature that comes
Mhm.
into it. And I understand some of the arguments, like one of my favorite early American philosophers, you could say, Lysander Spooner. He talks about, hey, I
Mhm.
wasn't around when the Constitution was signed. So what? I'm here, and I'm born here, and so I got to suddenly agree to these rules, right? And then you've people. There's all kinds of Larkin Rose, another really one of my favorite libertarians, and he talks about, I didn't agree to this, right?
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, there's the way things are and the way we want things to be, and the people that are in power, which supposedly represent us, but we all know they don't, right? We all know
Mhm.
that they just act on their own interests. If you look at the ones, especially here in Oregon, I mean, we understand the ones on the national level, but if you look at the ones here in Oregon, which was formed after the Civil War, right? And it was formed to be a place where people could be free, and it has a very strong, what you could call Second Amendment in the Oregon Constitution.
Mhm.
It's very clear. It's way more succinct than the federal one, right? The federal one
It is.
mentions militias, and the federal one mentions well-regulated. But what the people that never read books don't understand is that well-regulated meant loading, firing, and manipulating your musket or your rifle.
Well trained.
Right. The regulation of arms, right, comes down to, of course, like you and I experienced that on the drill pred in boot camp,
Mhm.
right? We had to march around. I used to curse. What was that guy's name? The Austrian that came over. He wrote a bunch of, he did close order drill, right?
Mhm.
And that was a great way to. I used to curse him on those hot days in San Diego on that drill pad. But at the same time, what did that do? It built esprit de corps. It built teamwork.
And it
It built
disciplined us.
professionalism. It disciplined us. And it disciplined us also, as we say, you snap in with your rifle for a week, and then you head to the rifle range. You shoot for a week.
Mhm.
No other force does that, right? I've experienced the Marine Corps. And when I got to the Army, I was appalled at their marksmanship standards and their
Mhm.
training standards. Just absolutely appalled. It was horrific, right? Because the standards slipped. And our founding documents are our standards. There are standards of, right? Obama used to talk about this. He'd say, oh, the Bill of Rights are a bill of negative rights. And he lamented that fact. Oh, there's things I can't do to you. That was his complaint.
Who did he say was the number one threat to democracy? Those who cling to their guns and Bibles.
And
Remember
Bibles,
that?
right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I mean, what a face. I remember in the early 2000s and in the 90s growing up, we had reached an almost racial parity in America, right? You had films like Blazing Saddles, Undercover Brother.
And the skits they did on Saturday Night Live,
Oh,
they could never do
beautiful.
today.
You could never do that today. You
But
could
people
never
could
ever
have
do
a
that
sense of
today.
humor back then.
Yes,
You could
everybody
laugh at
was
our
getting
differences.
along.
Yeah.
And we also had, and I like to do this, especially when younger people come to me and they complain about injustice and, oh my gosh, this guy's oppressed, that guy's oppressed. And I look at them and I go, you know what? I was standing nut to butt in Marine Corps boot camp with people of all races, and we all had to meet a standard.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly, when these legislators agree to represent the people, they also swear an oath to the Bill of Rights, to the Constitution, which is a standard. That is a standard. That is a
Mm-hmm.
list of things that I'm going to swear to this and I'm going to agree to it. And it's not for them to decide what it means. Every free man can read it. And the meaning of the words are obvious. And if you have trouble understanding the meaning of the words, go ask somebody that knows a little bit more. But the meaning of the words are obvious. And when you blatantly propose legislation that violates those very, very simple words, you are as far as I'm concerned, violating your oath of office.
Marbury versus Madison, all laws repugnant to the Constitution are void.
Absolutely.
Remember that ruling?
And we have a whole slew of these things coming along.
Mm-hmm.
And what's crazy, specifically for our state, which actually I believe it is, if I'm not mistaken, it's a Senator Manning from the Eugene area. He's actually saying that there's armed mobs of militia trying to roam the streets of Oregon and attack people. He doesn't know what the word means. He has no proof that this even exists. And you've seen other states trying to ban any sort of training, groups of people that have gotten together with training, or like that wonderful National Guardsman out in Virginia who was Soldier of the Year for the National Guard for his region.
Yeah, what was his name? That was an amazing interview.
Incredible story. What they've done to him. I mean, I was Soldier of the Year at Fort Carson when I was with the 329 Field Artillery. It is completely insane to me that people can't step back and go, wait a minute, I agreed to this rule. I agreed to represent you under this set of laws, but now I'm going to openly violate them and openly advocate for their overthrow. And then, like you said earlier, they'll say, well, you can't be a militia. We have the National Guard. Well, the militia is specifically there to defend against threats, foreign and domestic.
Mm-hmm. To execute the laws of the Union, repel invasions, and what is it about insurrections?
Yeah, and that insurrection could come from within or come from your own governmental body who is being unjust. And none of this is, none of this is vague. None of it's in some sort of hidden text. It's plain as day if you read it. There's, millions of quotes. In fact, I had highlighted a quote that, and this comes down, of course, Mason.
George Mason.
A well-regulated militia consisted in the body of the people organizing themselves into independent companies, each member furnishing and keeping his own firearms, always ready to resist the standing army of a despotic state.
Always.
Yeah. The Minuteman, of course, that's where it comes from. You're ready in a minute. You grab your rifle, you grab your shot, you grab your ball. Out you go. You're running around out there. None of this is hidden. None of this is obscure. It's all plain as day.
They just don't want to know the truth because then they may be compelled to do their duty as it's supposed to do. Which
none of them want to.
The National Guardsman Soldier of the Year was doing his duty as defined by law.
And his command recognized that. That's what blows me away. His command questioned him about it, found out what he was doing. They said, man, we want more people like you.
And they still cave to political correctness.
Yes, because so many of them are shackled by the chains of their retirement packages and their benefits, right? And that's what you do. I mean, look at all the FBI agents that violated their oaths, kicked in the doors of peaceful protesters, kicked into the door of pastors, held children at gunpoint, and you go to them and you say, hey, what are you doing, man?
Sometimes I go back to the Waco massacre, the British Davidians, what the Clinton administration did to them.
Yes. Operation Showtime. I remember that. I had just obtained a wonderful beach house in North Carolina outside Camp Lejeune. And it was this fantastic house. I felt like I was king of the world because I had made NCO and all my neighbors were young lieutenants. You parked under the house because it would get flooded out every year by the ocean.
Yeah.
And I watched Waco live when they were playing the dying rabbit screams, on loudspeakers for 3 days straight, terrorizing these people. I watched it live, and I would sit on my bed and watch it. Just be stunned. Yes, just stunned. I was stunned at what was going on. I couldn't believe what was going on. To watch that on TV.
The ATF made T-shirts later that said that they were hailing the Texas barbecue.
Yes, it's unbelievable. It's why they weren't. And of course, if you saw the news today, they were paying non-law enforcement members of the ATF law enforcement benefits to the tune of what they found so far, $20 million scammed. So not only will they kill your dog over a piece of pipe, they'll steal from you.
And all they wanted was to be left alone.
Yes, just leave us alone. Which the county sheriff said he could have arrested Koresh at any moment, but there was a reason why it was called Operation Showtime. because Clinton, for all of his foibles, Clinton looks like an extreme right winger compared to the policies of today. I mean, you listen to Clinton and Hillary, for that matter, talk about immigration.
Mm-hmm.
It's they're far more to the right than Trump. You know,
They were.
It's absolutely, and to have lived through it, and then hear the lamentations and the gnashing of teeth of people, you know, who are quite a bit younger. Oh, how could this ever happen? Do you read any history? Have you cracked a book?
Yeah.
And that's what I've discovered is most people will not read. They will not crack a book. They will scroll on TikTok. They will scroll on Instagram.
They have such a short attention span.
And it's been programmed into it, you know, because you and I were alive before the rectangle of fear was a thing that always rode in our pocket and alarmed us and scared us 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had to think for ourselves. And I always ask people in my classes, who here was alive before cell phones? And it's a distinct cultural difference in thought and outlook. There is no constant minder that's going to get you out of trouble, or there's no AI you can ask. You had to learn things, read them, and put them into your experience. And that is not going on right now. And it's a huge shift. And it's also what I've discovered just from the firearms industry standpoint. People now will purchase firearms, and then they'll say, hey, I'd like a holster for this. And I say, well, what kind of gun is it? I don't know. I go, you don't know what you purchased? Well, it's a 9mm. Okay, what kind of 9mm? A Glock. Well, which Glock?
Yeah.
Oh, I go, look on the slide. Read the slide.
Amazing.
This wasn't a thing a while ago. This wasn't a thing 20 years ago. This wasn't a thing 15 years ago. So this cultural shift that's happening is interesting because even though you have every answer in the palm of your hand, you can look up the Constitution. There's apps for it. You can read the Constitution. You can read the Bill of Rights. You can read your state Bill of Rights. People would rather be told by someone else what something says than read it themselves and reason it out themselves.
By one of their perceived authority figures.
Yes. And that fallacy of you know, the authority fallacy. Well, I talked to this guy and he's this guy. I asked, you always hear this. I asked a cop. But most cops don't know the law at all. They don't know statutes. The law in any way. Yeah, they know statute. Why? How can I arrest you? What excuse can I have to put you in handcuffs and transport you down to the jail? Right. And I talk to cops, you know, all the time. I mean, I make products. I've made products for police for 24 years. I've trained with them. I talk with them. Many of them are my good friends. But I will be the first person to say, hey, liberty is the key, and you're overstepping your bounds. And you can't do this, and that's not right. And for the most part, they agree with me, because if they didn't, I wouldn't want to be around them. For the most part, they agree with me. And they have a very, very, very difficult job. Very difficult job. And I respect the job that they do. But it doesn't take much to overstep your bounds. And recently, actually, a lot of my police friends have been talking about, well, the criminals have so many rights, you know, we can't do this, we can't do that. And I'm like, you know, that's a balance, though. That is you have a fine balance between liberty and tyranny and the government they complain about the government. For example, this 114 bill that was defeated, well,
Measure 114.
You could say, the original Measure 114, it was so poorly written that it would have reduced the police to 10-round magazines as well, even on duty.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is the authors of these bills don't understand the ramifications of what they're saying, and they don't understand also how it works on the federal level. So, for example, the ghost gun bill that they just came out with in Oregon, and it was passed. They said, okay, let's say you have an 80% lower. You build your 80% lower. It doesn't have any numbers on it. It doesn't have a serial number on it. Oh my gosh. And so the Oregon state legislature said, go and put numbers on it at an engraver. Okay, well, you haven't manufactured it and put it into some sort of database that the feds now know about. In fact, manufacturing a gun and making it look like it's some sort of factory built gun would be illegal to do as an individual.
Yeah.
But they think as long as you put these numbers on it, it's now not a ghost gun. Well, what does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
If I pick up a piece of paper and write on it, it's not a piece of paper that everybody knows about now. It is completely insane. They don't understand what they're talking about.
What's the main reason to serialize any product, like a VIN number on a vehicle? It's to track or trace it.
It's to track or trace it, you know? And that's what crimes has the ATF solved in a gun tracking? So, for example, years ago, I buy handguns to make holsters. So years ago, I had a visit from the ATF. It was these two young women who were not armed. I couldn't believe it. So, you know, I had to have some fun at their expense. But finally, I said, "Why are you here? What are you
Desk
doing?"
jockeys. Yeah,
they said, "Well, you know, we're asking about a thing that happened." And I said, "Well, what happened?" "Well, we can't tell you." I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Okay, 4 years ago, you sold 2 guns. And those guns ended up in the hand of a criminal in California." And I said, "Okay, I don't remember what guns I sold 4 years ago."
Mm-hmm.
And he might be 4 years ago. Okay. And they said, "Well, how did they get there? Did you smuggle them to California?" I said, "Are you kidding me? You come to my house and you accuse me of some heinous crime and you won't even share the data?" I said, "Who's the person at the bottom?" "Well, we can't tell you." I said, "How does this work? What are you guys accomplishing?"
Yeah.
"What are you accomplishing by doing this?"
That's how they claim
to get. You serving?
What's his name from the Ruby Ridge?
Yes,
name?
Yeah. That would be Randy Weaver.
Yeah.
And what they did with Randy Weaver, who was a decorated Special Forces veteran who just wanted to be left alone, and they sent an undercover ATF agent out there to befriend him and to convince him to cut down the barrel of a shotgun, which, from what I understand,
it was entrapment. In my opinion,
cut it to what he thought was 18 inches, which is the legal length.
Mm-hmm.
And this person who pretended to be his friend then took that shotgun barrel and said, "Oh, we'll say it's 17 3/4." And then they arrested him by pretending to be in a vehicle that was disabled. Mm-hmm. And when he and his wife, you know, terrible people they were, stopped to help the disabled vehicle, a SWAT team jumped out and arrested him for this terrible offense.
And his 14-year-old son thought they were being invaded.
Well, before that, with the arrest,
they shot him in the back.
They went to him and they said, "Because we've got this dirt on you of this made up crime of cutting a steel tube down below 18 inches, you will now perform as an undercover agent for us against so-called white supremacist groups around him in Oregon." Or in Idaho, because of course Northern Idaho was supposed to be this hotbed, you know, of Nazis, which they always go back to this terrible Nazi threat that doesn't exist. So he declines to work for them as an undercover agent. Now, what I've discovered talking to my friends who are in federal law enforcement and even customers, nobody wants to go undercover because they're scared. They're all terrified of doing it, right? One of my very good friends who was a Special Forces veteran, was in the DEA in Seattle. And I remember talking to him around 2000. He had long hair, you know, he was still serving in the Reserve Special Forces group, but he would go to drill with this huge goatee and long hair. You used to not be able to do that, you know, back in the early 2000s, that there was no thought of long hair and a beard in the military, which that all changed with Afghanistan. But he said, "I'm the only undercover guy in Seattle." I said, "Wait a minute. Seattle, which is a hotbed of heroin and has been forever, there's one undercover DEA agent in the whole city?"
Wow.
And he said, "Yeah." And I said, Why? And he goes, "It's scary."
Nobody wants to do it.
No, they all run on informants because they're not there to protect and serve. They're there to get their career, and then they'll do their 20 and then get out and start their carpet cleaning business, or, you know, whatever extra business that they're going to do, some of their second career. Well, they have this nice pad of federal benefits. Yeah. And it is very few, and of course you saw this in the military too, it is very few that will actually step up and do the work. Most are kind of go along, get along. And you see the same thing going on. Who wants to make waves in the ATF and say, "Hey, that's unconstitutional. We're violating this guy's Second Amendment"? No, it's what regulation do I have to enforce? Yes, sir.
They wouldn't
And
have a
then
job very long if they did that.
and it's very sad because if the ATF was helpful and they came in and they facilitated small business, right? Well, of
Mhm.
course, now what's going on is we have the Short Act, which is under great scrutiny right now. There's all kinds of stuff going on because these Republicans that were supposedly pro-gun
Mhm.
didn't really want to get rid of the registration part. That, oh, we'll drop it to $5, and there was some industry insider trading,
Mhm.
very, very dirty. When they should have just said, hey, the NFA is unconstitutional, right? The National Firearms Act would be the equivalent of a national speech act, right?
Yeah.
And nobody ever wants to compare the Second Amendment with the other amendments. They treat the First Amendment as an absolute.
Yeah.
No, you cannot do this. But the Second Amendment, they chip away, chip away, chip away, and you go, have you seen that word infringed? Have
A
you looked up what the
well-regulated
word
militia
means? Yes,
necessary to the security of a free state.
right.
The ATF reminds me of the Declaration of Independence.
Absolutely.
One of the
Yes.
grievances said
Yes.
he has sent forth swarms of agents to attack
Yes.
us and eat out our substance.
Eat out our substance, take away our stuff. And that's exactly what they've been doing.
Robert, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back to dive deeper into some of these subjects.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Violate your rights, no more equality. Surrender freedom, your social security. We the people.
All right, so we're going to let you know where you can find us online. AmericaTheBattlefield.com. I recently bought the domain name. Finally.
Oh, very good. Very good.
It goes to my blog where I post all my content. And I added a new quote at the suggestion of a friend in light of the great awakening that we're experiencing right now. For those who fell in love with the truth and resisted the darkness, awakening is truly a gift. Once awake, we learn that we have always had the answers right in front of us. We've always had more than we know. But we had to regain our sight first before things started falling into place, before things started to make a little more sense. That was by a filmmaker named Ryan Zem. You can also find all my videos on the Rumble free speech platform and YouTube, which censored 2 of my videos.
Yes, I'm surprised they didn't censor more of them.
You can also find us on X. I'm just kind of getting started on there. There's a lot of good info on X.
It really is. It's another free speech platform now, which is so monumental. I mean, what a paradigm shift compared to what it was before.
Most of my news comes from X. I'm also on Facebook now. It's okay. They still censor some of my stuff. But I want Robert to talk about his website here, survivalsheath.com.
Yeah,
Is that right?
survivalsheath.com. Yeah, Survival Sheath Systems is the name of the company. You can see a smattering of what I do there. I am basically a bespoke maker now. I don't have any employees, but I'm constantly working on custom projects for people. Knife sheaths are a big one. Of course, the chest holster, which now so many other people have copied, which, imitation is a sincere form of flattery, so that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I do a lot of different things for people. Everyone is different. There is no one holster that, one size fits all. When you usually try to do a one size fits all, it ends up working terribly for everything. So it's a very specific type of technology. It's old school. It's hand molded in the old way. It's not injection molded. It is custom fit to every type of different tool that you might have. Ah, there you are. Very good.
Check out this guy with my chest rig you made me. It's awesome.
Neat little gun. Yeah.
High quality.
It's a labor of love, really. I mean, I feel very fortunate that I'm able to live in the country I live in, and I feel very fortunate to have the family that I have, and my kids are all fantastic. My wife is amazing. I have fantastic friends. I have an exceptional amount of liberty, especially when you look around the rest of the world, when you look at history. And sometimes it's easy sometimes, I think, to go down a path of the weight of history's crimes can feel like they're crushing in on you, like you're going deep in the ocean. You're going to have a whole crush in your submarine, because it's overwhelming what people have done to each other. And the current tempo of complaining, that happens on social media. Of course, it's only accelerated through social media because it's right at our fingertips. You know, we're not sitting down reading the newspaper, going into the diner and talking to the people we know, going in and talking to our favorite bartender. Did you hear about what happened to Jim down the street? You know, it's global crushing weight all the time. I don't think that we know how to deal with it as a species because
it's overwhelming sometimes.
It is. It's overwhelming.
A friend said it's like there's a quickening to everything. I can't keep up with everything. I'm like,
right.
I don't have enough time in the day.
Right. That is difficult. It is very difficult. But we also have this incredible blessing now with technology that, you know, I was reading Tolstoy earlier today. I was listening to philosophers while I was working. I was reading a book. I can go, even when I'm taking a shower, I turn my phone on, I throw a podcast on.
I do the same thing.
What's going on? I mean, it is amazing. And I'm always reading 4 or 5 books. I can't read enough. I mean, if I could just be a professional reader, I would sit around and just read things all day because I'm always going down rabbit holes. But the constant that I come back to is the essential need for liberty. And liberty can only be sustained by the defense of the person and the ability to have personal agency in everything you do. And that is such a rare gift on earth. It is a thing that does not exist anywhere else besides the United States. And I have 12 ancestors I've discovered fought directly under Washington.
Wow.
So my family has a long history of putting musket balls and hatchets into people that want to take our rights away. And I know that sounds horrible and extreme, and somebody will clip that. Oh my gosh, she's a terrible person. How was the country formed? And then, you know, it goes back to that thing. How many people fought in the revolution? They always say 3%, 50% of the country was, they kind of divided the country into thirds. A third wanted to be free. A third were ambivalent.
Most people sat it out.
Yeah, they just said, oh, what's going on? The war's over there in the next field over. Oh, okay. Hope the house doesn't get hit by a bouncing, you know, piece of shot that comes across the field. It's just, and it's the same today. You know, you can talk to all kinds of people. They have no idea what's going on outside of their own little personal universe. And that's the vast majority of people. Like, you know, it kind of goes back to Isaiah, you know, and he's preaching to the crowd. And the Lord says, and he says, he gets frustrated. He's going to walk away. And God says, what are you doing? You got a job. And he goes, none of them care. None of them are listening to me. And God says, there's 9 or 10 people at the edge of the crowd. And that remnant is who you're talking to. So God himself wrote off most of the population of the time and said, you're looking for that remnant of people, that tiny group of people. And it is a tiny group of people that get anything done, right? And then if you listen to people like Jordan Peterson, he always brings up the Pareto principle, right? In a group of 10 people, one person really gets most of the stuff done. If you have a company of 100 people, you got 10 people that really work hard, and the rest of them are just kind of, go along, get along. And it's Colonel Grossman talked about it in his book on killing. In every infantry unit, in every platoon or squad, there might be one guy that actively puts his sights on target and pulls the trigger. The rest of them kind of fire in the general direction.
Yeah.
And it's these people that are going to preserve liberty in this country. And you're kind of seeing it now, interestingly enough, with this short act that's in huge controversy. They actually have shut down the budgetary session right now because of the amount of pressure. And ironically, it's around, of all things, suppressors and short barrel rifles. Right? Like, in fact, I just bought one of those wonderful PSA Krinkovs in the original Krinkov caliber 5.45 by 39, and I got my tax stamp in 48 hours.
Wow!
So the last one that I bought in 7.62 by 39, it took me 9 months. So it's very interesting that when there is an actual threat of losing your job, suddenly customer service becomes a thing. And but since I got it in 48 hours, that means we could have always gotten it in 48 hours. right? But we put up with it because who do you address to get some sort of better performance from your government when they have a complete monopoly on power? But as soon as their jobs are threatened, oh, well, I'm going to step up and provide some customer service. So it's very, very, very interesting to me what's going on. And this is what's holding up things on the federal level. Now, on the state level, as you have up here, we are under massive threat on the state level. And the initial bills that were coming out, in fact, they're changing them as we speak. They're scaling them down and trying to change them.
There's so many on the books.
There's so many on the books, but the big three, right, are coming up. 3075, which is a House bill, right? It's put forth by this horrible person, Jason Croft from Bend. Jason Croft has violated his federal and state oaths to the Constitution. So as far as I'm concerned, Jason Croft is irrelevant. He's completely violated his state and federal oath that he swore to.
He should be recalled.
He should resign. If he had any honor, which is not a thing anymore, he would resign. He has violated it. And so what he's doing is not only is he increasing the cost. So I love it when these people that run around saying we're for the poor and the downtrodden price the poor and downtrodden out of their individual rights.
They're just a special interest group to those people.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're a group to be utilized. You know, like
just
the way
like
the Bolsheviks utilized people.
Illegal immigrants, gangs, and cartel members are just a special interest group.
Yes, it's so sad. So that's a big one that he's trying to bring back the unconstitutional 114 and background checks, permit to purchase. The permit to purchase architecture doesn't even have a body to enforce.
Yeah.
So they're saying, oh, we'll push it out to like next July or something so we can build this vast bureaucracy where they can't even pay for the basic things that they're supposed to provide now. It's unbelievable. So that's a big one. And they're probably going to push it through because Oregon is run they have a supermajority of Democrats who are fantastically corrupt. I think the Justice Department, a few months ago, they came out with a study that Oregon is the most corrupt state in the country.
And that's all based on apportionment.
Yes.
The blue corridor between Portland, Salem, and Eugene. And all
we have 36 states
here.
You know, 5 states elect the governor every time, which, my solution to that would be an electoral college on the county level. You've got to win a majority of the county. That would actually moderate the state and it would make the state government far more representative than it is. But instead now you have the Join Idaho movement. You know, oh, we're just going to join Idaho.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, and Idaho a lot of people, and one of my best friends live in Idaho. He's looking at that in fear. He's like, I don't want to have all this other stuff because large sections of Idaho now are turning blue as well.
Yeah,
right. And it's a creeping disease that erodes liberty. And that's what's fascinating to me is the people that demand crazy outlandish things like change your gender, modify people's sexual organs, call yourself what was that? They just had that woman on that commission in Oregon, a mental health commission. She identified as a turtle, and not just a turtle, a terrapin.
Mentally insane.
A very specific turtle.
Yeah.
You're going for not a snapping turtle, a terrapin.
And they're making decisions for the rest of us.
They are making collective decisions for people.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely incredible because none of these people will deal with people at the individual level. Which is why they have no problem trying to take guns away, because they look at the people that do crimes as gun owners. So the criminal with a gun is the same as the veteran with a gun, the same as the cop with the gun, the same as the man who's protecting his family. They don't see any difference between them.
And how many times have we seen these shooters? Most of them have been tied to the military intelligence apparatus from their parents, or like MK Ultra, mind control.
Drugs that these ADHD drugs and drugs like that. The biggest common denominator between all those drugs is they remove empathy. And if you have no empathy, right, which a lot of these people don't, especially the representatives, if you have no empathy and you can't put yourself in somebody else's place, you can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you'll make sweeping, broad decisions. And depending on your level of psychopathy, which I believe a lot of them are psychopaths as well.
Yeah.
You'll say that group of people can go to a camp. I mean, they had that happening in the Washington legislature. I remember it was live on screen. I was watching Mike Adams, and the Washington legislature put out a call for detention camp workers for
I remember
COVID
that.
camps. Yeah. And Mike Adams said, he goes, wow, he's reading it, and he goes, it just dropped. It just changed, because he brought attention to it. So you had the state above us.
The health ranger.
Yes, the health ranger. Fantastic information. The state above us were in the process of creating concentration camps, which, of course, pioneered by the British back in South Africa. But what we saw in the 20th century, they're trying to replicate today. But again, it's not coming from the evil, Christian conservatives. It's coming again from the collectivist left, which cannot see people as individuals. They cannot see people as people of their own agency. They're constantly making these broad, sweeping statements. And so that's where you see, I would refer to them kind of like, I've heard them called recently, the anti-humans, right?
Yeah.
They don't like people. They're happy with mass large-scale abortion. They're happy with mass sweeping changes to societies by fiat. And
another word is eugenicists.
Oh, well, Oregon's history.
They believe in depopulation.
Oregon's history in eugenics is very deep. Oregon was one of the most eugenic states in the Union.
Wow.
There was a woman named Owens who was Astoria's first doctor. She was Astoria's first female doctor, pioneer doctor, celebrated. Everybody refers to her as like this feminist hero. She was for the abolition of religious schools. She wanted to get rid of the Catholic schools because she wanted to eliminate the Catholics. They had too many kids for her. She advocated mass sterilization. Some of her policies went all the way up to the Oregon Supreme Court, where they had to say, hey, doctor, you can't be doing this. Oregon sterilized people up through the 1980s. In fact, orphan boys in Oregon that were in the custody of the state were sterilized up through the 1980s. And it was actually Governor Kulongoski.
They didn't want us procreating.
Well, it's a class war, right? Because Owens, Dr. Owens, who ironically married General Adair, which Adair Village was named after where my kids go to school. Adair Village was a giant World War II training ground.
Wow.
Massive. And Monmouth, Oregon was the artillery impact area from that training ground, where every year they find artillery shells come up in farmers' fields in Monmouth, and occasionally they have to call EOD, which is
that's cool.
Funny. But
they should call you next time.
I'd go. I'd have a good time. I could get access to the explosives. I'd love to do my old job. But Owens was, you could be sterilized if you were considered unfit, or if your house was considered to be untidy. The whole family, from a county sheriff, would be sent to the Oregon State Hospital and sterilized with no anesthesia.
That's diabolically evil.
That went on
forced
for years.
Sterilization. That's like the whole forced
years.
Vaccination program during the COVID madness.
And we exported this philosophy to the Germans. And the Germans just were far more organized because they were in a smaller geographical location, right? So they were able to dissolve the republic, because Germany used to be a series of principalities and kingdoms, right? And it functioned phenomenally. It was a huge free market, place, because everybody had their own ownership, their own
Weimar
agency,
Republic.
you could say.
Right.
Yeah, the Weimar Republic. And then that fell, of course, with the effects of World War I. And this eugenics stuff was huge in America. And the state fairs in America used to have best white family competitions. You get a blue ribbon for having this beautiful looking family. You could get a degree in eugenics in state colleges for about 15 years. You could get a degree. Now, what's your degree in? Eugenics. We're going to breed the perfect human, right? Diabolical stuff that we now say is horrific, and we denounce it. But what is abortion? At the end of the day, when you get down to, I know we're kind of going far afield with this, but
it's okay.
If you get down to abortion, who does abortion affect the most? It was the people that Margaret Sanger said we must convince their religious and medical leaders that this is a good idea for them, because we don't want the useless eaters. And to this day, more African American children are aborted than born.
Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, and she
Hideous
said she
eugenicist.
created Planned Parenthood to pull
Yes,
the
she did.
black weeds. I like to
Yes.
remind people of that. And there's
Yes.
a Planned
And
Parenthood
she's considered a
facility
hero.
in every inner city in America.
Yes, right there.
I'd like to bring us back to the Second Amendment topic with a
Yes.
quote. We were talking about the school shooters earlier, how
Yes.
a lot of the times they're tied back to the military intelligence apparatus.
Yes.
This is a quote from William Cooper from his book Behold a Pale Horse in
Oh, great
1994.
book. Yes.
Chapter 12, The Secret Government. Quote, the government encouraged the manufacture and importation of military firearms for the criminals to use. Remember Operation, Eric Holder and Obama?
Yes, Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious.
Yes.
This is intended to foster a feeling of insecurity, which would lead the American people to voluntarily disarm themselves by passing laws against firearms. Using drugs and hypnosis on mental patients in a process called Orion, the CIA inculcated the desire in these people to open fire on schoolyards and thus inflame the anti-gun lobby. This plan is well underway and so far is working perfectly. The middle class is begging the government to do away with the Second Amendment.
Yes.
Unquote.
Yeah. And what I find fascinating is, like, even on the state level, right? You have all of these terrible people on the state level, like Representative Croft, who violate their oaths. If we wanted to get rid of the state level Second Amendment, or the equivalent of the state level Second Amendment, you can amend the Constitution.
Yeah.
If we wanted to get rid of the federal Second Amendment, you can amend the Constitution.
It's a living document, right?
Instead of doing that, they chip away at it. You know, it's the equivalent of saying, I'm going to come into your house with a pair of medical shears, and every time you say a word that I have deemed illegal, I'll clip a piece of your tongue off. You know, and we'll slowly make it to where you can't speak anymore. Your speech is unrecognizable because we don't like the words that you're speaking. That's what they're doing to guns, and the guns are protected just as much as the speech. And so the real conundrum comes in when people like the people in the Oregon legislature, when they pass laws like this, it is our duty to defy them.
A lot of people leave that word out. They're like, "Oh, it's your right to do that," but
and that's a hard truth.
Your
and it's
right
a truth.
and your duty.
It's uncomfortable to say it because I don't want to do it. I mean, look at what happened to all the original the signers of the Declaration of Independence. They all lost everything. Many of them died in British custody, being tortured.
They were hunted down. Their wives were in prison. They seized their property. A lot of people don't know that. They're like, "Oh, they were just rich white slave owners."
Right, because the Marxists, you know, speak in group language. But you know, the personal toll that standing up for this took was rarely positive.
Acting on principle always requires a sacrifice.
Always. It's like telling the truth to your friend, you know. When you tell the truth to your friend, hey man, you need to lose a few pounds. Nobody wants to hear that, you know.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear truths that they know are true. But we have a duty to resist a tyrannical government, and a government that would disarm you to where you cannot protect yourself or your family and your loved ones is tyrannical. And to even propose those restrictions is tyranny.
Yeah.
And it blows the people that constantly go on and on about civil rights have no problem stripping those rights away. And of course, who is going to enforce that?
But they only want to censor their opposition. They don't want us to talk because I think deep inside they know we're telling the truth. An uncomfortable truth for them.
Of course they do.
It hurts their argument.
Well, this is what you saw when you had Facebook censoring the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
You know?
They said some of this content may include hate speech.
Yes. And what is hate speech? I just had this conversation.
There's no such thing. There's just speech.
There's just speech. I just had a conversation. Of course, you know, all the stuff that's going on with that woman in Minnesota. You know, and that's who said the terrible word at the park, and then the juxtaposed against the kid who killed the guy at the track meet. You know, they both have GoFundMe accounts. And I had one of my friends from Scotland who I love. I've trained with him here in America. Fantastic martial artist. And It's, oh, you can't say that. He doesn't. And I said, no, that is the speech you must protect.
Mm-hmm.
We must protect the most offensive speech. We don't have to protect speech that doesn't offend us. That requires no effort.
Yeah.
We have to protect the speech that's offensive. And the left used to be this way in like the 70s. You know, the ACLU defended the Nazis and their right to march.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Nazi. I don't think that people should be Nazis.
They used to be inclusive and broad-minded and tolerant.
They were broad-minded. They actually defended the Second Amendment even, you know, which now they won't. And the funniest part about defending the Nazis is because they publicized it, people showed up and they mocked the parade. And, you know, we used to have that spirit with Monty Python.
Yeah.
You know, we used to have Richard Pryor. People would say, they would show and amplify offensive things, and we would all laugh about it. But nobody would say, hey, you can't say that.
Yeah.
Hey, we have to shut you up. And to have lived as long as I've lived, I lived through that era. And I became comfortable in that era of this is how we're always going to have that. You know, I'll be able to order a Solthern anti-aircraft gun out of the back of Shotgun News. And if I have the money for that, I can ship it to my farm and fire at targets 2,000 yards away, you know? Yeah. And that's, of course, you know, John Ross with Unintended Consequences, which, you know, that's that fantastic book where he uses the Solthern, right? We grew up in that era where we took these rights for granted, right? We thought, oh, this is never going to change. You got the Second Amendment, because I grew up in Oregon, and it, for most of my life, it's been run by Democrats, but the Democrats of the 80s and 90s were completely different people.
They've swung totally so far left that they're bordering on Marxist socialism.
They advocate for it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's, and then they put laws into effect, especially concerning firearms, and they feel good about it, but the laws that they put into effect have never been enforced. So just like, you know, if you read the Oregon Constitution, they just put this amendment in. I think they passed it last session. Everybody has a right to affordable health care.
That's a privilege.
Okay. That's okay. You put that in. How do you enforce that?
Yeah. How do you fund it?
Right.
More taxation.
How do you? This is now a constitutional amendment. So they amended the Oregon Constitution for that, but they won't amend the Constitution when it comes to the right to keep and bear arms. Yeah. But then they'll pass laws against their own Constitution, which right on its face, you should throw it out.
It's so disingenuous.
It's completely disingenuous. And then they surround themselves with people like Moms Demand Action and all these other, you know, groups. Oh, the Alliance for Safety and Utopian.
Remember Sarah Brady, the Brady campaign?
Yes.
They did so much damage. And what is his name? David Hogg.
Oh, yeah.
Who supposedly survived that Parkland school
He wasn't
shooting.
Even there.
Yeah.
He wasn't even there. And hilariously now he's understanding who he's gotten in bed with, because they've kicked him out.
Yeah.
Because of his race and gender.
Yes.
You know, it just, and the fact that they look at that and they're constantly screaming
he's not
racism,
in the protected class.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. You know, the lack of maturity, the lack of reason, and then, or even the ability to sit down and talk things out. Because I love talking to people I've never met, and I'll sit down and I'll talk to somebody that says, you know, I'm a flaming Democrat. I want this and this and this. And I'll say, let's get down to the core principles of why you feel like you feel. And 9 times out of 10, they end up agreeing with all of my core principles.
That's called the Socratic method of inquiry.
Yeah.
Asking leading questions.
And
I do that a lot too.
A lot of people don't like it. They can't deal with it. In fact, I had a guy get very hostile towards me recently because he was like, how dare you ask those questions? And I said, I'm trying to find common ground here. And that's where, you know, it kind of goes back. The state, the foundation of the state is its constitution. The foundation of the country is its constitution. We don't teach it anymore. We don't, you know, you ask most kids, what's the First Amendment? They might get that, but they get it wrong. What's the Second Amendment, third, fourth, fifth? You know, and I'm a you could say privileged position because I teach it. And I constantly say to my students, you've exercised your First Amendment, you're exercising your Second Amendment. Now that you've exercised your Second Amendment, you have to deal with the state. So now you have to exercise your Fifth Amendment and your Fourth Amendment for that matter, right? You have to protect yourself with this list of bills. And very rarely do the people taking the class even understand what Miranda means.
Every time we fly in a commercial airliner, they violate our Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures. They're assuming that we're a criminal. We have to prove our innocence.
Yes, and that I love how that was put into place under this thing called the Patriot Act. You know,
they always name it the exact opposite of what it is.
The Affordable Health Care Act.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely incredible.
And they brought that back. They passed the Patriot Act on the pretext of 9/11, which psychologically manipulated the public.
Well, it's ruled by trauma.
Yeah,
you know, and
trauma-based
they
mind
do
control.
The same thing to us in primary school, right? Most people have never seen footage of a battlefield until they learn about the Holocaust, and then for the rest of their life, we have to refer to Hitler and the Holocaust as the worst evil. Well, what if we showed kids pictures of the ethnic Germans killed in the Holodomor, in the mass killing that Stalin took place mainly through starvation, using the NKVD and the predecessors to Antifa.
They co-opted all the farmland and agriculture.
Took it all and murdered people for having a grain of rice. And there were piles of corpses. They couldn't get rid of them. There are still gulags in Russia, former gulags, where when you walk across the ground, it crunches from the bones. Stalin killed more people prior to World War II than were killed in the Holocaust.
Some estimates are up to 60 million unarmed civilians.
Yes. And the first thing they did was disarm them. And then in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which was, of course, fully supported by people like Kissinger, they did a mass roundup of all firearms in China. And they disarmed the whole country, and they ended up with 3 flintlocks. And then the killing that took place there was so massive that they referred to human beings as logs. I mean, they dehumanized everybody, you know, and and that's never taught. We don't see those piles of corpses. We don't see the piles of corpses of the people Stalin killed, but we're given this lens that the Nazis were the worst. But in reality, through things like Operation Paperclip, we took all of those Nazi doctors and scientists and put them in charge of our space program.
Gave them new identities.
Yes.
Werner von Braun.
Colleges.
Yeah.
Well, look at what happened with, say, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. He was subjected to an MK Ultra program, and the scientist in charge of that was a former Nazi doctor, and it completely warped his mind with what they did to him in the college. And there were so many other programs that
Have you read his book, his manifesto?
Yeah, and I
incredible.
have to say it's an incredible, because the guy was brilliant. He was brilliant, but he suffered from too much empathy, if you think about it. He looked at what was going on. It's the same charge that they do against Daryl Cooper, right? Daryl Cooper from the Martyr Made podcast, he has changed the way I see almost every conflict. And it's because he has an overwhelming amount of empathy. He says, imagine if you wake up in a village in Gaza and suddenly you have armed soldiers shoving muzzles in your face, and they kick you out of your house, and you have to go live down the street in a shack or a tent and watch another family move into your house. But at the same time, he says, imagine if you wake up in Eastern Europe and the guy that's your doctor, your butcher, your baker, your candlestick maker is suddenly raping your wife in front of you and killing your kids. And so where are you going to go? And you're told, hey, you can go to this place that is your homeland in your founding religious documents, right? So he's showing empathy, which, if you have any empathy, you recognize the inherent right to self-defense. You recognize the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, the people that are considered to be Appalachian hicks, tobacco chewing, redneck pickup truck driving, non-empathetic brutes.
They have signs in front of their house that say, "Government, get out."
Yes.
I've seen
that. Those are the people that actually have empathy for other human beings. And those are the people that overwhelmingly join the U.S. military.
They're putting their money where their mouth is, having skin in the game.
Right. And I did that. You did that. Very few people do that anymore. Very few people understand it. And it all comes down to, I mean, I look at what really breaks my heart right now is watching these old World War II veterans that live in the UK. And they can't even go out on the street. And these guys are saying, what did I fight for? What did my friends sacrifice themselves for? That is so horrible to me. And none of this has to happen, because if you go back and you look at the founding documents and you live by the founding documents, it limits, when you think about it, it limits coercion.
It restricts the government.
It's a bill of, as Obama said, rightly, it's a bill of negative rights. You can't do this. You can't do this. And when he was running for president, he said, no, we got to have this bill of positive rights. You get free food. You get free houses. You get this. Well, through what economic principle does that happen?
That's a product of this chronic sense of self-entitlement that we're seeing play out, especially in the youth. They think they're literally owed something. They think
which
respect is given inherently
by the social media.
It's not earned.
Everybody has their own TV. Everybody's a TV star now. I have my own production company, which is me, and which is why I could probably do a lot more business if I put my products on YouTube and I had my own YouTube channel and everything else. There's something about it that I just consider kind of horrific. You know, I can't stand that kind of mass audience promote myself thing. You know, it's uncomfortable for me. I way prefer small group settings, you know, face-to-face interaction, but it is very important to get the message out like you're doing, because so few people are open to this. I think it is changing massively. And I'm so happy to see that's the blessing and the curse, right? We opened the Pandora's box of this massive, massive free speech avalanche platform. And you look at how it's so fascinating to me. The British recently said it. They said, if you threaten us or call us names, we'll extradite you to England and put you in jail. Like, what? Are you kidding?
Wow.
It's absolutely nuts, you know. And it's like, do you guys not understand what happened in 1775?
I'd like to read something from my notes on this subject, and then we're going to bring it back to our state laws and statutes and what they say. I'm going to read from the law so everyone knows what it actually says, despite the disconnect. The complete prohibition on arms of all kinds in the nation of Japan has been enforced since 1588, when the military dictator, I'm probably going to butcher this, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, decreed a, quote, sword hunt and confiscated all firearms and swords from the peasantry. Hideyoshi's decree perceptively observed that, quote, the possession of unnecessary implements makes difficult the collection of taxes and tends to foment uprising, unquote. With that said, we're hard
to rule people who are armed.
We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this.
Sounds good.
And we're back with Robert Humelbaugh of survivalsheath.com. Right.
Yep.
I'd like to read something from my notes on mass shootings. One of the most thorough studies on mass public shootings in history, published September 28th, 2020 by John R. Lott, Jr. of the Crime Prevention Research Center, titled, I'll put this on the screen for the viewers, Comparing the Global Rate of Mass Public Shootings to the U.S.'s rate and comparing their changes over time. The study findings were that between 1998 and 2015, there were 2,470 mass public shootings around the world, of which 53 occurred within the United States, which accounts for 2.2% of the world's mass public shootings. Even with our 393 million gun owners, 46% of worldwide total civilian-owned firearms. The anti-gun lobby often uses mass shootings as a pretext to bring in draconian anti-gun laws. We've seen that all throughout history, especially in the modern age.
Yeah, they're definitely that is actual justification for some of the newest attempts here in Oregon, especially with the so-called rapid fire trigger devices. They think, oh, somebody's going to get, even though none have been used in a so-called mass shooting, but you got to understand that the people that collect data on mass shootings that are on the banned side include children as people up to the age of 19, so you could literally be an active duty Marine, and they include any group of 3 or 4 or more than one. So gang shootings are included in mass shootings. And then they say, oh, it's such a terrible threat because they publicize them so much.
Mm-hmm.
We must limit, and they're doing it right now in this next bill. We must limit rapid fire trigger devices like bump stocks. And they're still saying that the Las Vegas shooter used a bump stock, which there's no evidence of that. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. They turn the rapid fire activator, it says it turns a semi-automatic rifle into a fully automatic rifle,
mm-hmm.
which, as we know, since we have half a brain, a bump stock is still a semi-automatic rifle.
Mm-hmm.
And the things like binary triggers and force reset triggers are still semi-automatic rifles. But none of the people that author these things understand how the firearms even work.
Yeah.
And so the impetus is there's going to be a mass shooting, which, what do they refer to? They refer to the trauma porn
mm-hmm.
of Las Vegas. So Las Vegas happens. It's never solved. Nobody really knows what the hell's going on. People that question it are moved aside or killed.
That was the Mandalay Bay Hotel, right?
Yes. And I had one of the survivors in my class, and he gave me completely contradictory information, and he was in one of the front rows. And I said, why don't you go public with this information? He said, because so many other people that were there that went public had unfortunate accidents. So that shooting took place on the day that the first vote for the Suppressor Freedom Act was supposed to take place.
How coincidental.
And Hillary Clinton came out and said, imagine how much worse it would have been if there would have been silencers. Well, it would have been the same.
Mm-hmm.
He was 300 yards away. So it wouldn't have made one bit of difference.
Bill Clinton said something similar after the Oklahoma City bombing during his administration.
Yes.
He said to Congress, how much more do we have to see in order to pass this bill? Remember, it was the omnibus anti-terrorism bill.
I remember that.
Left through Congress after. Sorry.
I have a personal connection to Oklahoma City, ironically. I was in Fort Sill doing forward observer training for 13 Foxtrot. That was the MOS I picked up when I moved from 11 Bravo infantry in the National Guard to active duty Army. Then I went from 13 Foxtrot to EOD eventually. But I was in Fort Sill, so I'm standing outside of a class waiting for the bus to take us back to the barracks, and these Hueys are going overhead with the Red Cross on them. I'm like, what has happened that we're having this crazy medevac situation? Bus driver pulls up, he opens the door, and he goes, somebody just blew up the federal building. I said, what? What are you talking about? He goes, somebody blew up the Oklahoma City building. I was like, what? Now, at the time, right, remember that time frame, I had a Walkman that had a radio in it. There was no internet. There were no cell phones.
1995.
So I walk around with it outside the barracks trying to get all the information. All of the news sources were saying this was because of Rush Limbaugh. That's who they blamed the Oklahoma City on.
Wow.
Those patriots, those evil patriots, which we now know was an actual operation run by the FBI called PatCon.
Timothy McVeigh, they
conspiracy.
recruited. He thought he was doing some patriotic duty, and then they betrayed him and used him as a patsy.
Or he was a defense intelligence agent.
Yeah.
Well, one of the two. So my secret paperwork, I had to have a secret clearance to operate the lasers involved in forward observation at that time. It was in the Oklahoma City building. So it got blown across Oklahoma. And ironically, that delayed me from being stationed in Korea. So it was kind of a godsend. I ended up at Fort Carson, Colorado instead. Now, later on down the road, I finished EOD school, which was a year. Very hard school, 50% failure rate. I passed it, and I show up for duty at Fort Lewis. And when I get to Fort Lewis, first group calls us up, and they go, hey, we're going to build the Oklahoma City bomb. Can you come out and make sure we don't blow ourselves up? And so I said, wait a minute, we're duplicating the truck bomb? Why would you do that? Then I was like,
Fertilizer.
cool.
Yeah.
Let's do it. That's interesting to me, right? I love blowing things up. Very fun. So we went out and set it off. Okay, low explosive. Well, I'm just now in my career kind of learning the difference between high explosives, low explosives, all these different things. So they set it off at Fort Lewis. Their conclusion, truck bomb didn't bring that building down, right? Because low explosive, like ANFO, doesn't have the cutting strength to destroy reinforced concrete pillars.
The load-bearing members.
Load-bearing member, it can't.
It's a hard target, just like the Twin Towers were on 9/11.
Right. It doesn't have the right brisance, they call it. So then the Air Force recreates the bomb at Eglin Air Force Base, which is where a lot of my UAD school was at. They blow it up with a reinforced pillar right next to it. Doesn't happen. They build the bomb again and touch it on the pillar. It still doesn't blow it up. Still doesn't damage it.
It didn't have a high enough yield. Right?
It doesn't have the brisance. So like if you want to cut a reinforced member holding up a building, you have to use high explosives like C4 and many times a cutting charge, like a linear shape charge. What they do with that in demolition is they'll put a high explosive and they'll put low explosive behind it. So you cut it, and in a microsecond you've cut it, and then just a microsecond later the low explosive moves that member. So
we saw those beams tandem in the Twin Towers cut at a 45-degree angle.
Yes,
I'll put that picture up for the viewers.
Yeah, that's how explosives work. So the Air Force general in charge of ordnance comes out. This was, I want to say 98, 99. And he says the Oklahoma City truck bomb didn't bring the building down. So fast forward to 2012, I think, 13. A friend of mine who was in Special Forces and then later CIA Ground Branch has to get his top secret clearance renewed, and I'm one of his references. So I meet this federal agent in West Salem Starbucks, and she says, "Hey, I'm here to do." I'll call him Jeff. I'm here to do Jeff's security clearance for it. She says, "What do you know about Jeff? Should he have a clearance?" I'm like, "No, he's a terrible person." And we laugh. And we start talking. She's asking me about my history. She was stationed at Oklahoma City in the building. And she was told not to come in. Now this is a person that's on active federal service.
I heard about those phone calls.
Yeah. Prior. And I said, how about that? And I said, so what do you think? And she goes, oh no, she goes, I watched them stringing det cord through the stairwells, but I didn't know what it was at the time. They posed as telephone repairmen. And so and then she said, the irony was they very quickly bulldozed the site.
Yep. And destroyed the evidence. It was a crime scene.
She was joking that they brought the folding chairs for the memorial service in rider trucks. And she said, wait, I thought we were all supposed to be terrified of rider trucks. So I have a weird connection to Oklahoma City.
Wow.
And as my career progressed and I gained more knowledge about demolitions and explosives, and then watched them do literally participated in rebuilding the truck bomb based on McVeigh's diagrams that he drew in court.
Were you aware, Robert, that there was a second device and all the true information came out on day one?
Yes.
There was a second device they brought out and a soda machine.
Just like the truck bombs that they caught in New York.
Yeah.
On the day of 9/11, they caught truck bombs that were being parked underneath, and they were returning from being parked underneath.
Yeah, they tried to bring it down in 1993. They messed that one up too.
Yes, they messed that one up, and they tried to frame an Egyptian guy for that, and that came out, and the FBI literally paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars because he recorded them trying to frame him. I mean, it is so dirty and so awful, and the rot that has gone on in our intelligence agencies is so deep. And it's one of those things.
It's systemic.
it makes you depressed when you learn about it and you take off the rose-colored glasses and you go, wow, I was lied to my whole life. I was lied to about every war we were ever in. I was lied to about all the motivations. And you get down to it, and then you say, look, that's not what happened. And then you have to get the jeers and taunts from the hoi polloi that you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a weirdo or something like that. It's like, no, I read books.
Yeah.
I look stuff up. And I really love how Jimmy Dore talks about it, but because Jimmy Dore, of course, was a man of the left, I really enjoy talking to people.
He's a classical liberal.
Classical liberal, like I am. I'm a classical liberal. And Jimmy Dore said, remember when they said, do your own research meant reading, and you shouldn't do that during COVID? You shouldn't read.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me and fascinating. And I've had a weird intersection in my life of being involved as you were with me to enforce U.S. foreign policy in places, going along with that narrative, coming back, realizing, whoa, they lied. Then I was very adjacent to Oklahoma City, literally personally affected by it. Thank God I wasn't killed by it. And in fact, today it came out on Twitter. James Comey put that thing out threatening President Trump's life. James Comey had overseen the placement of the Whitewater files in Oklahoma City. That's where those files were stored. And that was going to bring down Hillary, and Bill Clinton was under impeachment.
Wow.
And as soon as that bomb went off, the Whitewater investigation went away. And FBI agents were stepping over people trapped in the rubble to pick up papers.
Yep.
That is so diabolically evil.
I remember the eyewitness testimonies. They ignored the screams of survivors to
pick
collect
up papers. And those papers were the Whitewater files.
That reminds me of WTC 7, the Solomon Brothers building on 9/11. If it had collapsed on its own, it would have been the largest property crime in the history of the world. What was it, 48 stories? It came down into its own footprint at free fall speed.
Yes.
The WTC building housed the Securities and Exchange Commission, which was investigating Wall Street corruption.
Yes.
And the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld held a press conference saying, yeah, we can't account for $2.3 trillion in
Instead, it was a crime
in the Pentagon budget.
Yes.
They were like, what?
And the office.
Yeah, we don't know where it is. We're looking for it.
That was the accounting office was the one hit by the plane.
The budget analyst office.
The budget analyst office. All those records gone. And so it's a fire sale. And we always have these jokes about, my business is going bankrupt. I'm being investigated. Oh, gee, what happened? I guess I had a fire. What do you do? What do you do? So that's.
And after that day, it was unpatriotic to ask about it.
That's right.
What happened to all that money? Shut up.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's unpatriotic.
And now we see that since Reagan and since we had the Church Commission after they killed President Kennedy, since Reagan, USAID, the Foundation for Democracy, all these different weird NGOs morphed into and became the arm of the intelligence agencies.
Yeah, funneling money to their players.
Yes. And I was unwittingly part of it, because when I was in northern Iraq, when I was up near the border of Syria, down in Panama, I was unwittingly adjacent to these things, thinking in my 19, 20-year-old brain, I'm defending democracy, they hate us for our freedom, all that stuff. So it is a fascinating thing, and it's very hard not to be phenomenally jaded and cynical about things. But at the same time, if you zoom out and get a bird's eye view of the scope of history, this isn't the first time this has happened. There are many other unbelievable things that have happened in the past to civilizations, to cultures. There's cultures that have risen and fallen, and we're part of that history. But the maximization of individual liberty, like our founders intended, is the fight. Because if we lose individual liberty, if we lose the ability to defend ourselves on a personal level, right? You can't go to somebody's house and say, pack up 2 suitcases and go get on a train. We have a nice shower waiting for you. If they have an AK-47, if they have an M4 or similar type of, if they have a lever action rifle, you can't do that to armed people. And armed people keep a population safe. And it's, I mean, the Greeks understood this. The Romans understood this. What did Caesar do in Gaul when he took over Gaul? He lined up all these men, and instead of killing them, he had their thumbs chopped off so they couldn't hold a sword. You know,
and
the
armed
great
citizenry
Julius
is a
Caesar.
polite citizenry.
Yes, and it must be defended. They will pass these laws anyway in Oregon. The ones
They'll
coming
try.
up, they will pass.
They'll never stop trying. Yeah,
it's a Democrat supermajority.
Yeah,
but what will happen is they won't enforce them, and that's what they've done with the last 5 bills. For example, 554, right? HB 554. We're going to restrict you from going to all these places. You can't carry here. You can't carry there. They put metal detectors in the Capitol building. Oh my gosh, we're all so scared. Why do you pass laws against people with permits who are the most law-abiding people in the country? The most law-abiding demographic.
Yeah.
We've done all the work. We commit less crimes than cops. Cops commit 7 times more felonies than people with CCWs. Why is that your focus? That is a projection saying we know who we want to control. We want to control those people that are the good people, that are the law-abiding people. We want you to do terrible things. We want to indoctrinate your children with things that are completely against your cultural values. And we can't have you being able to resist, because that's what a rifle is. It is the ultimate no to the government.
The ultimate
we want you to
check.
do that. No,
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. And they hate it. Remember, the revolution, the hot revolution in America started with a gun confiscation. That's because they were burying their cannons and their rifles in their fields. And the British came and said, "Give us your cannons and your guns." And we said, "No, we're not doing it."
In my opinion, the word no is the most important and powerful word in the English language.
Well,
No.
I mean, remember in the 80s when "just say no" was the national rallying cry? You know, just say no against drugs. Just say
I was
no
a kid,
against
but I
this.
do remember the commercials.
Yeah, just say no. You know,
Yeah.
just say, okay, yeah, consent, right? It's like Lysander Spooner. He always talks about the ultimate freedom is voluntary freedom.
Voluntary consent.
Right? You and I had to consent to speak to each other on this platform. When I go to the store, I consent to give Safeway $3 for a can of soup. That's a voluntary arrangement. The only involuntary arrangement is the arrangements we have with the government. When the government says, "You'll pay us this much money based on our assessment of your house, or we're going to take your house. And if you resist, eventually people with guns will come and kill you, put you in a cage."
I
Because
did a
you said
couple
no.
deep dive podcasts about voluntary consent and the income tax, which they're taxing our wages and calling it income. But if you read the tax code, income is profit derived from capital from corporations. It's not wages. They just depend on our ignorance.
That's right. And nobody wants to look it up. And you know, and there's been multiple IRS agents.
They're like, "What are you going to do about it? Not pay your taxes?
Right.
They're going to come after you." You know.
And then on the heels of paying your taxes, they talk about this thing called the social contract. Well, if you have the social contract that you are the monopoly on violence and you provide protective services in exchange for that income from us, and then you don't provide the protective service and you allow looters and rioters to destroy the city, why would you pay taxes?
Yeah.
I'm not getting the product that I gave to you. And then when it comes down, you say, "Okay, you're not protecting me. I'm going to protect myself." No, you can't do that. Well, why? Well, because you might commit a mass shooting. Well, no, I'm not going to commit a mass shooting. I'm keeping my family and I safe. But we're scared of you. Well, why would you be scared of me?
Have you read Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars?
Oh, yes.
It was William Cooper's second chapter in his book. And there's a section in there that says the best evidence that the people are ripe for shearing is that they voluntarily comply with paying taxes to a government that does not represent its own best interests.
Yes.
And they can provide no law that they are required to pay.
They can't, and it isn't the law. And it is amazing and there are multiple IRS agents that quit the IRS and stop paying taxes.
Oh, yeah.
They come after them. But what's very
Stephen
sad,
O'Bannon was a big one back in the
yes,
day.
yes, it makes me sad because you could come to me and say, we would like a yearly contribution to this fund in order to take the mentally ill and the drug addicted off the sidewalk and put them in a hospital, but we need money for that.
Mm-hmm.
I would contribute to that. I would say, yeah, you know what? I'm going to give you, I'll write you a check every year, or I'll take a cut of my income to fund that type of hospital collectively. Just like I'll say, you know, when they oh, we need a bond in Dallas right now. We need a bond to pass a new police department. Yeah, we need a better police department. And I depend on the police to go after the meth head that's driving 100 miles an hour through town. That's not my job, right? And you don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry to be able to take pot shots at people like that. You have a group of people that do that, right? That's fine. Mm-hmm. That's perfectly fine. But come to me and ask and get my consent.
Yeah. Robert,
and it's funny because, you know, consent is the buzzword. Oh, he touched her without consent. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I also agree with consent. I'm also a big fan of consent. But for some reason, once it gets past a certain group, it's cut off.
Yeah. Robert, you mentioned earlier traveling between states with your Idaho concealed carry.
Well, Utah mainly. Yeah.
Utah sorry. Yes.
Carry. Yeah.
I keep this binder in my truck. It's got, I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
It's got all my pertinent state law information. It's kind of blurry, but from handgunlaw.us.
That is smart.
It has all the pertinent laws that apply to me that protect my rights under state and federal statutes and our constitutions. And I'd like to read from some of these laws. I think it's really important to add context to this subject because a lot of people say, you know, like, oh, well, we don't really need the militia anymore because, you know, we have the National Guard. This is something I wrote a long time ago, and I keep it in my notes, and that's also in this binder, and I can refer to all this. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to read, this is from when I lived in Florida. Okay. The Oregon Constitution, Article 10, titled the Militia.
Yes.
From Section 1.
Myself.
Yeah. The Legislative Assembly shall, in the law, the word shall means will. The Legislative Assembly shall provide by law for the organization, maintenance, and discipline of a state militia for the defense and protection of the state. Section 2, persons whose religious tenets or conscientious scruples forbid them to bear arms shall not be compelled to do so. That goes back to the First Amendment. Section 3, the governor in his or her capacity, Tina Kotek being our governor, is commander-in-chief of the military forces of the state, and they shall appoint and commission an adjutant general. All other officers of the militia of the state shall be appointed and commissioned by the governor upon the recommendation of the adjutant general. She is in dereliction of duty on its face.
There is an Oregon militia, and that, of course, is the organized militia compared to the unorganized militia.
Yeah.
And the rest of us, as it talks about in the Oregon Constitution, between 17 and 45, and that we're able-bodied and we consent, are in the Oregon unorganized militia.
And it's on the books.
It's
never been repealed.
Right. And so if they have an issue with it, like I believe it's Manning does, if you have an issue with it, then change the Constitution.
Yeah.
There's a way to do this.
All they do is complain.
They complain and then they pass laws that are unenforceable and are never enforced. Change the Constitution. I mean, this, we have an amendment for affordable health care. Why don't you make an amendment that grass only grows to 3 inches?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. And I mean, you have right here in the Oregon Constitution, the people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power. That's a lot more clear than the federal Constitution.
Yep.
It doesn't say that people will have the right to bear arms with 10-round magazines.
Yeah. And that distinction between the National Guard and the citizens militia.
Yes. Organized, unorganized, militia versus Guard. Because the Guard is federally controlled.
Yep.
The Guard is part of the federal army.
Yeah.
right? When you join the National Guard, as I did, you can be whisked away to Iraq, Afghanistan, anywhere, the border,
Hmm.
Panama. You can be taken anywhere because you're part of the federal service.
Yeah. Sorry.
But people don't understand how to make this distinction.
Yeah.
And if we had a strong and very robust unorganized militia that you could put a call out and say, hey, we need unorganized militia members to show up because this county is under flooding.
Hmm.
People would come to that. People would
Yeah.
respond to that call. It would be a community. They're always talking about community this and grassroots that. It exists.
Yeah. This is I delineated in my notes here. All 50 states have similar provisions in their state constitutions and statutes defining their respective militias under the
Yes.
law.
Yes.
And a lot of people have no idea. They think it's some archaic notion.
Well, nobody reads these things.
Yeah, they don't want to do their due diligence.
Right.
The Oregon
Nobody sits down
Revised,
and reads.
yeah, so every state has similar provisions. This is our Oregon Revised Statutes, Volume 10, Title 32, Chapter 396, entitled Military Affairs, Emergency Services, Militia comprised of organized and unorganized militias. The militia of the state shall be divided into the organized militia and the unorganized militia.
Right.
The organized militia, as we know, is the National Guard and the Oregon Air National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
The unorganized militia shall consist of all able-bodied residents of the state between the ages of 18 and 45 who are not serving in any force of the organized militia or who are on the state or who are not on the state retired list and who are or have declared their intention to become citizens of the United States.
Right. And again, there's provisions in there that if you don't want to do it, let's say you're a Mennonite or a Quaker or something, you don't have to. Again, the founders understood consent.
Mm-hmm.
They understood the nature of voluntary relationships.
Yeah.
And the people that talk the loudest about being a volunteer and giving in and helping out, it's got to be grassroots, rely now on coercion. And whenever you say, hey, I don't really want to do that, they say, well, maybe we'll send some guys with guns. Well, how is that voluntary? How is that grassroots? No, they rely on force because, again, at the end of the day, what the government really is a territorial monopoly on violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they can't stand the fact that people can say no. And they always use some crisis, they use this Hegelian system.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll create this horrible crisis, and now you need us even worse. I like to say in my classes that government is like your mother-in-law after you get married, and you move into your own house, and she moves into the garage, or she's got her camper in the driveway, and you're in there with your wife, and she comes in at midnight and says, "Honey, can I make you a sandwich?" And you go, "Mom, I'm married now. I'm a grown man." "Oh no, don't you need me?" And you go, "Mom, look, I'm now my own guy. I got my own family. Well, why don't you need me?" They're like Munchausen by proxy people.
Alex Jones calls that the nanny state.
Oh, it's totally the nanny state. And there's a constant need for them to be needed and wanted. Well, most of us don't need them. In fact, I would surmise with the technology we have now, we could live with about 90% less of our government. But people have, and you see this with the people protesting and burning Teslas and doing it. Government is their religion.
Yeah.
They have their faith in it. They get something from it. Catherine Austin Fitts was recently on both Jimmy Dore and Tucker, actually, and she talks about how she went to a conference. It was like 400 people, and she said, "Look, the economy of the United States runs on all kinds of horrible things: human trafficking, drug trafficking, all kinds of massive, horrible financial crimes, murder, wars, all these things."
Yeah.
And she asked these 400 people who were religious. She said, if you could press a button and end that, but it meant that your check was cut off, how many of you would press the button? One person out of 400. And she said to the rest of the people, why would you keep this evil going? And they said, we don't want the checks to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So it reminds me of that story about how do you domesticate wild geese? Well, you find the place, you find the pond where the geese come down when they're migrating seasonally, and you put a lot of nice food out there. And the geese go, oh, this is fantastic food. And they start stopping there more and more. And pretty soon they don't leave.
That's how the social welfare system came in. Social
Yes,
security,
yes,
preying on people's need to be taken care of.
yes, yes. And even, a lot of people think that, the KKK was Democrat run,
Mhm.
always Democrat run.
It was, and I can prove
And
it.
yeah, and the first instance of it where they had to make a terrible compromise
Mhm.
was you had Roosevelt, who openly allowed Klan rallies,
Mhm.
uh, went to the blacks and said, I'll give you, you vote for me and I'll give you this little stipend every month. And they said, the leadership said, but you're in the Klan.
Yeah.
You guys are, you're literally racists. But
Remember, Truman was a uh, Grand Dragon of
yes,
what state was he from?
and Woodrow Wilson
Hmm.
resegregated the military. But all of these early progressives are heroes
Yeah.
to these people, and they were all hideous racists.
Can I read a quotation about
Of course,
this?
yes,
This is from Eric Foner's book Reconstruction, published in 1988. In effect, the Klan was a military force serving the interests of the Democratic Party, the
it
planter
was.
class,
Yes,
and all those who desired restoration of white supremacy. Its purposes were political, but political in the broadest sense, for it sought to affect power relations, both public and private, throughout Southern society. It aimed to reverse the interlocking changes sweeping over the South during Reconstruction, to destroy the Republican Party's infrastructure, to undermine the Reconstruction state, reestablish control of the black labor force, and restore racial subordination in every aspect of Southern life. The Klan.
yes. And the Klan, ironically, was multiracial when it was started. It was initially started to resist those the carpetbaggers that came down. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
Nathan Bedford Forrest was part of it. And when he discovered it became racial, because he had freed his slaves voluntarily who served with him. Of course, he came up in that system, but
Mm-hmm.
he had freed his slaves that were riding with him. All but one stayed with him. They asked him to join the Klan because of the carpetbagger situation. When he found out they turned it into a racial institution, he left. And yet, you'll get through this revisionist history that he was the founder and the main promoter, and he was a terrible racist person. When he actually had a redemption story that sounds like one of the books of the Bible. I mean, the guy, that he started out with slavery. He's a great warrior. He then freed his slaves because he understood their humanity after living with them and fighting with them and serving with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then he rejected it, But it's fascinating to me when you get into this. Is why I spend so much time reading history, because you can't make it up. I mean, the things that have happened that are so monumental that people have been through, and I get reverence and awe for our ancestors to understand the trials and tribulations they went through. And now we are on the verge of throwing it away. And we're ironically on the verge of throwing it away now that we have the ability to access any information we want at the palm of our hand. We don't have to go to a library. We don't have
Instantly.
to leave our house. We have instant access to any of the founding documents of any state, any civilization.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was literally reading before we talked today, I was reading the bylaws of King Canute. I mean, from my
Mm-hmm.
couch,
Yeah.
I mean, come on, anybody can do this. It's just it's unbelievable to me.
It's an awesome tool.
It is.
And
It's an incredible tool.
I think for some reason the elite considered that it would enslave us, but I think it backfired. And we're all using it as a tool to learn and grow and share
You
truthful
definitely
information.
see that desire to give us this ability to have the knowledge and yet control it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely have the second round of technocracy. But we already had it once. We had it in the 30s.
Yeah.
The technocracy movement was crazy. And now we have the same thing, but on a digital level. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it evolves. But at the
Yeah.
same time, at the end of the day, when it gets down to it, you end up with a brown shirt or a black set of boots on your doorstep. Can you resist them or not?
Good point. Robert, I'm going to bring this to a close soon, but I'd first
Absolutely.
like to read something for our audience. Let me
Yes.
see if I can move myself here. It's a little weird. Cool. This is from a United States Supreme Court ruling from the District of Columbia versus Heller 2008. A citizen's right to keep and bear arms for personal defense unconnected with service in a militia has been affirmed in the U.S. Supreme Court. Decision, District of Columbia versus Heller. The court Justice Scalia wrote in the majority opinion, the Second Amendment protects an individual right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in a militia and to use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense in the home. Justice Scalia, went on to define that a militia, quote, comprised all males physically capable of acting in the concert of the common defense. The anti-federalists feared that the federal government would disarm the people in order to disable the citizens' militia, enabling a politicized standing army or a select militia to rule. The response was to deny Congress power to abridge the ancient right of individuals to keep and bear arms, so that the ideal of a citizens' militia would be preserved.
Ancient right of individuals to keep. Think of that. Ancient right of individuals to keep and bear arms. It is an ancient right, and it's an inherent right. It's a God-given inherent right. And those that are against it are the enemies of man.
Yes, sir. All right, so I'm going to close us out with a quote. Bear with me here. I'm fat fingering things. Okay. Can you see this? This is one of my favorite quotes by Samuel Adams, one of my heroes. I visited his grave in Boston. If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude, better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsel or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chain sit lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen.
Well, isn't that the truth? Yeah, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it all around us.
So this is where everyone can find your work.
Yes,
survivalsheath.com.
They can. My phone number's on that page. Give me a call. Give me a text. I'm happy to work with you.
You can email him.
Yeah, you can email me. You can ask me for classes. I will come to people's churches, homes, gyms, wherever you want to teach. All I need is a TV and an HDMI cable.
And his class is amazing. I learned so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, Robert.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Let's do it again soon.
Good deal.
This is Tim with America the Battlefield. Until next time. Thanks for tuning in.
The Constitution isn't worth the paper it's written on.